Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. And as well, we wait for a few more people to join us. I'll go ahead and introduce our guest today. First off, I'm Tracy Grandine. I'm Vice President of Communications at the American Peanut Council. Thank you again for joining today's kickoff coffee break discussion. In the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee, this new AP series intends to inform and encourage dialogue on topical issues for the peanut industry. Starting us out with a three-part look at food safety and cybersecurity is Amy Philpott. Amy will share 3 standalone cases today and the next 2 Thursdays, which you can access through the link you use today. Again, these are standalone, so if you miss one, which we hope you don't, you won't be at a disadvantage. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Amy and her fantastic work for the peanut industry over the years. But in case you aren't, Amy is the founder of Philpott PR Solutions in Washington, D.C. She has dedicated more than 20 years assisting companies and organizations throughout the food chain to protect their brands, reputations, and business relationships in both domestic and foreign markets. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Amy.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And thanks to the American Peanut Council for setting up these coffee break discussions. This is a great format. I'm very much looking forward to it. It is hopefully going to be short, sweet, and dynamic. And in order to do that, I would really love to see everybody's video. It doesn't matter if you don't have any makeup on or if you're in your PJs still. If you can at all stomach the idea of being on video, please do, because yeah, I want to see you. I want some participation. This is the way to get the most out of this very short time that we have. So thank you, Joy, Alex, Peter, Jesse. I hope to see you soon. Carolyn, Anthony, Tayo, Brian. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to jump right into it. I picked a case study today on Bluebell ice cream or Bluebell creameries, and it was a food recall that happened back in 2015. I would love to hear from people. Feel free to unmute yourself. I would love to hear from people who even heard about this recall. Yes, you can raise your hand if you want, but I'd really love to hear voices too. So unmute yourself. Let me know if you have heard.
I heard about it, and ice cream is my favorite food, so I paid a lot of attention to it.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I believe there was one of the earlier uses of DNA sequencing to find out the source and all that.
You're right. They used the old, yes, they used the old method PFGE patterns as well as whole genome sequencing. And they used both of them together because whole genome sequencing was very new. Yeah, I don't know who that was because I didn't
I'm with Carolyn.
Screen. Who
I'm
was it?
on the screen now.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Fred.
Fred. Oh,
Yeah.
you're with Carolyn?
He's with me.
I'm with
Excellent. Who else heard about it and what did you hear?
I just remember it happening, and I remember we couldn't get Bluebell ice cream for the longest time, and it felt like a really long time. You know, when something's always available, you don't really think about it, and then when you can't have it, it's like that's all you want, and you go to the grocery store and you can't get it. And I think it was the cookie dough flavor. Maybe it was the cookie dough was the issue.
That was the first one. Yeah.
The first one.
Yeah. Yeah. So who among you is or was located at the time in 2015 located in Texas? Because that's where the creamery is located. And Texas had a really different reaction than the rest of the country because of the loyalty to the company. They had loyal consumers everywhere, but certainly if you were in Texas, you probably heard and saw a lot of different angles than maybe around the rest of the country. So I'm just going to give a brief summary, certainly not all of the details because that would take all of our time, but I'm going to give a top line summary and do a level set on some definitions that we need to know. So In terms of definitions that are helpful in this case is the difference between a food recall and a food market withdrawal. And we hear both terms sometimes in the news, and they're very different. They're different from a legal liability perspective, and they're also different from a company's responsibility. A recall is the actual removal of a product because it has been determined to be hazardous to public health to one degree or another. There are different classes of recall, 1, 2, and 3. 1 meaning that it could cause death and serious injury. 2, maybe temporary injury. And 3 is that it doesn't cause an injury, but it violates the food, drug, and cosmetic law, so it has to be removed from the marketplace. A market withdrawal is done for almost optional reasons, right? So a company may want to withdraw a product from the market because, say, they've changed their label and they don't want the old label out in the marketplace. So they pull that product in because they don't want 2 different labels out in the marketplace at the same time. Nothing wrong with the product. Product is fine. So market withdrawals are done by the company. And the most important thing to note is that there is nothing hazardous about the product. The other thing I want to mention is that is to make sure that everybody understands that Listeria monocytogenes is a foodborne pathogen, and this is the pathogen that was found in the Bluebell ice cream. And it is particularly virulent for younger populations, the elderly, and pregnant women, and can cause death. The thing about Listeria is, while it doesn't cause the most number of illnesses or deaths, I think that belongs to Salmonella, it does have the highest percentage of hospitalizations. So you may have fewer people involved than say comparatively to Salmonella, but you'll have a higher percentage of them get very, very sick and have to be hospitalized or worse. So understanding all that, in 2015, the South Carolina State Department of Agriculture took several samples of Bluebell Creamery's ice cream from not from their plant at first, but from a distribution center. And they found a positive for Listeria monocytogenes. In the news and kind of as part of our vernacular, we just say Listeria, but technically speaking, Listeria species is everywhere, and it's benign to human health. It's specifically Listeria monocytogenes that is the type of Listeria that is harmful to humans. So even though in the news or among ourselves we casually use the term Listeria, it's actually a specific type of Listeria that makes folks sick. So El Mono, for short, was found in the plant. The company decided to issue a market withdrawal. They didn't contact authorities. They just issued a market withdrawal for a very limited amount of product, the type of product, the flavor of ice cream that tested positive. And what happened over the next 6 weeks is that there was, after they found the positive in the product, FDA and states started investigating their production facilities in Oklahoma and Alabama and Texas, and they all came up with positives for Listeria monocytogenes. And it took the company 6 weeks before they issued a recall. They did this initial market withdrawal for a very limited amount. And it wasn't until 6 weeks later when these other positives popped up in the facility, and they were linked to 5 illnesses in a Kansas hospital. And I'll explain what linked means, but they were linked to these 5 illnesses in Kansas. And it wasn't until that news came across or was delivered to them 6 weeks later that they actually issued their first recall. But it was still very narrow in scope. It was only institutional products that were served at hospitals. For example, those little, the little tiny cups of ice cream that you get when you're in the hospital. You might get it for dessert with your meal. None of their retail product. And eventually, after 3 or 4, I guess it was 3 different announcements or different findings, they kept issuing recalls, what we call recall creep. Okay. They issue a recall and then expand it and then expand it and then expand it. And the whole time, I should say in the beginning, not doing a very good job of managing communications until later on after they issued that recall. So, and then eventually, I guess it was in August. So the first finding was in February. They started production back up again in one of their plants the following August. So, Jesse, you mentioned that it seemed like forever that you couldn't get product. It was probably about 6 months where you couldn't get product, because eventually on their 3rd recall, they finally just said, we recall everything out in the marketplace that has our name on it. We're recalling it. So that's kind of the overview of the recall. I'm going to stop there and just I've written down some of the lessons learned that can be applied to other industries and other companies, and how we can learn from their mistakes as well as their successes. But I'd love to hear just your, first of all, if you have any questions about the actual recall, but then also if you have any thoughts on, what they probably should have done. Oh, you're on mute. Carolyn's unmuting you here.
Am I on yet?
Yeah, you're on.
Okay, the biggest problem, right at the beginning, they called it a withdrawal when they had a positive. That was a big mistake. The FDA will not recognize the term withdrawal if it falls under any one of the 3 categories. So that right away is a big problem. So I think it's important to clarify the difference what you did. I mean, a withdrawal is there's no threat at all to food safety, but it could be a labeling or could just be an old label that they want to phase out. But even a label issue could be a recall in a recall category, especially if it's allergen related. So anyway, I think it's important to bring that out.
I was curious as to why the FDA let them get away with just doing a withdrawal, as states were finding out that it was a real problem.
Yeah, both really good insights and comments. So, Carolyn, you first. The officials didn't actually learn about the market withdrawal until weeks later. This was something that they didn't do a public notice. They pretty much just contacted their customers on their own and said, hey, pull back that product. And it wasn't until later that FDA even found out that they had done that, because I don't think they would have. And I'm sorry, I know it says Carolyn there, but you're Fred, right?
That's correct.
Fred. So Fred, you hit it right on the head. And this turns out to be a very critical decision in the lawsuit and the case that the Department of Justice brought against the firm, is that they issued the market withdrawal, but that did not warn consumers of the hazard. There was a hazard. This was not a withdrawal. And because it took them so long to issue the recall, think about it, you have 6 weeks of people consuming product that could potentially be contaminated. Not that all of it was, but come on, you've got positives in all 3 of your facilities and a distribution center. It's certainly not zero risk. There is certainly a risk out there. And ultimately in 2022, about a little more than a year ago, ultimately, the president of the company would be brought up on charges, not convicted, but brought up on charges, not because they issued a recall, but because they didn't issue it fast enough, and that their initial action to issue a withdrawal was an attempt to hide a problem and put consumers at risk. So it was that decision that ultimately 5 of the 7 count felony charges against the president would be founded on that single decision to not be transparent in the very beginning and delay that recall. I will also say that just this morning, I attended a workshop where a regulatory lawyer mentioned that they being the food regulatory community, is seeing a disturbing trend in lawsuits where consumers are suing companies who issue recalls, not for injuries, not for getting sick, not for hospitalizations, but because they didn't have the information they needed soon enough, that it was lack of transparent, prompt advisories. And apparently, certainly the old angles haven't gone away, but a different angle on lawsuits to food companies. So that single decision was extremely important, and it sounds like will continue to be important to make those decisions quickly. That doesn't mean we jump to those conclusions. It means that you need to be ready to get your advisors together, get the information you can, and make a decision quickly. So yeah, both really good points. Anyone else other than the market withdrawal recall delay, which caused so many problems? It also resulted in this recall creep, right? Where it's just one recall after another, and consumers were getting confused. Is this the same recall that they're still talking about, or is this a different recall? So there was an incredible amount of confusion at first because we kept getting these notices, and it wasn't clear why and whether these were different recalls or the same recalls. So that recall creep, and I see that with companies that I work with, they want to minimize it to as small as they can in the beginning, which is obviously what you want to do. But whatever scope you choose, you need to be pretty confident. And if there's any doubt, if you're thinking, well, maybe it's another week's worth of production, we're not sure, our records aren't clear, or for whatever reason, you're not clear, better to include that week right off the bat than issue one and then 2 weeks later issue another one, because it's just going to make the entire experience draw out. What else? Are there any other thoughts? I mean, I didn't give you all of the information, obviously. I did hint about the goodwill in Texas and the difference, in Texas, which is where the creamery is based. There were companies and individuals taking out advertisements supporting the company. God bless Bluebell Creameries. God save Bluebell Creameries, support Bluebell Creameries. There were GoFundMe pages to donate. So it was there was a lot of goodwill, got a lot of goodwill that had been earned prior to the issue, which I think is another lesson, that the entire reason that company survives today is because of the trust and goodwill they developed before they had the problem. Yeah. I'll mention another topic on the communication side, which I didn't hint to in my summary. There was a very different approach and communication strategy before the recall and after the recall. So for those 6 weeks, they essentially remained quiet. There was very little said. They didn't announce the market withdrawal. They didn't post anything on their website, their Facebook page, nothing. They were very quiet. And as a consequence, rumors started to fly, both on social media and in the industry. So there were rumors going around. They made a statement, I guess at the 4th week, they did make a brief statement, because they realized that consumers were confused and consumer sentiment was starting to turn. So they did post a brief statement, but it was very vague and not a lot of details. And in my opinion, created more problems probably for them than not. It wasn't until they issued the recall, when they hired an outside firm to assist them with crisis communications, and that's when they really started an effective communication campaign. The CEO had a video on YouTube, which you can still see today, talking about it, apologizing, telling folks what happened, what they're doing, not only for the current situation, to get so that they could start production again, but also to prevent it from happening again. All messages that are really important during a time like that. But it was late. It came very, very late. Now, better late than never, and the company survived. So it worked for them, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it. It would have been great if they had come out with all of those wonderful messages very early on.
Curious about, how did it actually happen? How did they get listeria in multiple plants? And where did they get the listeria anyway?
Yeah. So the first listeria finding, I believe, came from the Oklahoma plant. I think that, if I remember right, that was the first one. I have not, to be honest with you, I have not heard how exactly it came to be, and I don't know if they really know. The enforcement reports that will tell you what they found when they were in the plants are online, and I've read them so long ago. There might be something in there that would show us. Is there anyone, maybe one of you food safety folks, anyone that remembers what those enforcement reports said about possibilities?
Yeah, I didn't see the enforcement reports. I looked at just the general. There was an announcement when they reached a settlement with the Justice Department, and it said ultimately they think one of the root causes was water contamination. I think there was an issue with the temperature of water used to decontaminate the facility, and then an issue with, they said, the age of the facilities led to contaminated water coming into contact with a food safe, already pasteurized product. So I think it was a combination of those two things, it sounds like, which is apparently why it was systemic across multiple plants. Kind of unusual.
Yeah, that is unusual. You would think, well, they have different water sources, so that's even more unusual. Yeah, so
I have a question, yeah, Amy, for you. So obviously recalls happen. How common is this negligence on the part of a company leading to punitive legal action by the government? How often does that actually take place? Because I would think that's much more rare.
It is rare for, yes, it is very rare for it to get that far. I will tell you probably what I'm working on a recall. I work on probably 12 to 15 recalls a year. So not quite, well, it's got to be a little more than that because sometimes I'm working on 2 at the same time. But I would say 1 out of every 3 recalls that I work on, there is a discussion among company leadership about why can't we just issue a withdrawal instead of a recall? Why don't we just issue a recall for this one lot and later, if we have to, expand it? So those conversations happen all the time. I think especially companies that are prepared and planned and they know that they should be bringing in subject matter experts to assist. I think if they have those types of folks around the table and they can hear a second opinion or a third opinion or a fourth opinion from folks who do this all the time and know, understand what the consequences are, then virtually I've never had one of those 3 decide to go ahead and take those actions after they have spoken to me or legal or other scientific advisors. So are the thoughts out there? All the time. But it's rare that a company would actually, take those steps. And I think part of it is that it doesn't appear, at least early on, that Bluebell had advisors around the table. They were trying to manage it with the knowledge they had, and they knew their business, but they obviously didn't understand the regulatory framework that they were dealing with.
Amy, I'm curious how it impacted their reputation and the sales in the immediate aftermath.
Yeah, this is the amazing thing. It's amazing that they survived, right? They had 10 illnesses, 3 deaths. 3 of those were deaths. The recall was over a 10-year period. They ended up recalling everything in their inventory at one point. One of the figures that I've seen is somewhere between 180 and 200 million dollars is what it cost them. And yet they had a very wealthy, interested stakeholder that loaned them, made a personal loan to them to stay afloat and to come back and to correct the problem, to reopen and slowly. It was obviously a staggered, staggered launch. But today they are not as big as they were. They're still coming back, even this, nearly 10 years later. But they are in the marketplace. Some folks never lost confidence in them. And other folks, they've had to earn that confidence back, but they have done a much better job on the communication side in the recovery aspect and being transparent about what they did and what they're doing to prevent it. And in that sense, it's a success story on how to recover from a really bad situation that you probably made worse. Sorry, Christina, you're on mute. Yeah.
How did he manage to avoid conviction? Do you think that their later efforts were helpful in that, or?
Well, interesting. It was so it was a trial, a court hearing, and the jury. It was a mistrial because the jury could not come to a unanimous decision. It had to be unanimous. 10 of the 12 jurors agreed, and they couldn't get the other 2 to agree, so it was a mistrial.
Was it in Texas?
He wasn't, yeah, and he wasn't convicted. So yeah, You know, that's the other thing that can help a company to Tracy's point or question. That's another thing that can help a company is when the company distance itself from the CEO or the leader that was responsible at the time. Then that can help consumers feel like there really is change. And so now I can trust this company because that person is gone. Whether or not that's, you know, that's true or not, that oftentimes that's why CEOs are dismissed, not necessarily because it was actually their fault in a single way, but they were in charge when it happened. And distancing the company from that person can help them recover, help their reputation recover. BP did the same thing, right? Chipotle did the same thing. Yeah.
So
Oh my gosh. Okay. This conversation could go on, I'm sure, and I would love to, but this is meant to be a 1-cup coffee discussion. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for their videos and their questions and their comments. It really is so fun to just have these brief conversations and talk about different ways of looking at the same problem and what we can learn from it. So as Tracy mentioned, next week I'm focusing on cybersecurity in agriculture, specifically in agriculture. This is a newer crisis for us. And if you, I'm not going to say if, because I'm going to hope everybody on here has a crisis plan or a recall plan, and you have a list of key resources or key contacts. And I really think that in the direction we're going, every company should have the FBI's cybersecurity 24-hour number on their list of key contacts for crises, because it's happening to small, medium, and large companies in the agriculture and food supply chains. So we're going to talk about that next week.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining today, and we will see you back here hopefully next Thursday, same time, same link you used today.